There's a truth about you that society fights hard to keep buried, and it costs a lot for those who discover it. Have you ever noticed how people seem slightly annoyed when you say you'd rather stay home? How the silence of your living room bothers more people than it should? It's not just your impression, it's a defensive reaction. Because the moment you start to feel that your own company is enough, something inside the social system creaks softly, like a gear that just noticed one of its pieces slipped out of place. Because when you realize that the silence of your living room doesn't impoverish you but actually gives you back to yourself, you threaten an entire logic that sustains billions of people. The illusion that being surrounded by others is the same as being alive. And here's the part nobody warns you about. Once that awareness sets in, it doesn't make you accepted, it makes you inconvenient. The first great deception of modern life was turning movement into virtue. You wake up, grab your phone, and before you even brush your teeth, you've already seen 20 people doing things. Someone just boarded a flight. A 5 a.m. workout with a motivational caption. Someone got a promotion. A photo of lunch at a restaurant with beautiful lighting. And you, still lying in bed, feel that familiar knot in your stomach. It's not envy, it's something else. It's a silent demand whispering that your life is standing still while the world moves on. Except no one told you one thing. What looks like movement is, most of the time, just agitation. And agitation is not the same as direction. Schopenhauer, writing back in the 19th century, already saw this problem with an almost prophetic clarity. In his aphorisms on the wisdom of life, he described the common man as someone who runs away from himself because he can't stand his own company. The statement sounds harsh, but if you pay attention to the people around you, you'll notice it describes exactly what happens. Those who have no inner peace need noise. Those who have no substance need an audience. And those who don't know who they are need external mirrors all the time, reflecting an image nobody has ever confirmed on the inside. Idleness has become a disease in the eyes of the world. And listen closely. I'm not talking about laziness. I'm talking about empty time, time without a task, time in which you simply exist without producing anything tangible. That kind of time has been criminalized. The culture of hyperconnection has convinced billions of people that being still means falling behind. And the result is an entire generation that is terrified of sitting alone in a chair and doing absolutely nothing for 20 minutes. The modern mind has become a hostage to the next stimulus. And like every hostage, it pays a ransom that gets higher and higher for a freedom that never actually arrives. The introvert, without even knowing it, has become the easiest target of this collective accusation. I know nobody prepared you for this truth, and maybe you've been carrying this guilt for so long that it already feels like part of who you are. But watch this with me. The introvert naturally seeks out silence, and silence, today, has become suspicious territory. If you'd rather spend a Sunday at home than a Sunday surrounded by people, then something inside you must be broken. That's the subliminal message. But that message has a problem. It doesn't take into account that there are people whose soul organizes itself inward rather than outward. And that inner organization is not a defect. It's a legitimate psychic structure, just as valid as any other. Nobody ever told you that. Here comes the great turning point. Schopenhauer built a thesis that holds this entire video together. In his aphorisms on the wisdom of life, he claimed that a man's happiness depends far more on what he is than on what he has or what others think of him. It sounds simple, but notice the weight of that statement. If you are little on the inside, no amount of friends, parties, or scenery is going to fill that emptiness. And if you are a lot on the inside, a rainy afternoon staring out the window can carry more density than a 2-month trip through Europe. He who possesses much within himself needs little from the world. That's the sentence that changes everything. And it changes everything because it shifts the axis of existence from outside to inside, from a noisy place you don't control to a silent place that depends only on you. It's a transfer of power that, once made, never gets reversed. The modern introvert is not antisocial. He is self-sufficient in the making. And self-sufficiency, in a world that profits from your emotional dependency, is almost a subversive act. You don't spend on what you don't need. You don't chase what doesn't complete you. You don't sell yourself for approval. That bothers people. It disrupts the logic of the market, which needs insecure people in order to function. A person who is enough for themselves is a person who consumes less, obeys less, and performs less. And the system, of course, would rather you didn't figure that out too soon. But figuring that out requires walking through a difficult doorway, the doorway of solitude. And here we need to make a distinction that a lot of people mix up, because everyday language throws everything into the same basket. There is solitude that hurts, and there is solitude that sets you free. The first one is imposed. It's the solitude of someone who was left behind, someone who was rejected, someone who wishes they had company and doesn't. That kind of solitude is an open wound, and I'm not going to minimize it. The second one is chosen. It's the solitude of someone who seeks out their own bedroom, because there, at last, the external noise falls silent, and their own thoughts begin to speak. These two forms of solitude use the same word, but they are opposite universes. Schopenhauer said that only in solitude is a man truly free. And if you've ever experienced one of those nights when you were home alone, with no rush, no task, no obligation to answer to anyone, you know what he was talking about. There's a different kind of breathing when you don't have to perform. Your face relaxes. Your inner voice returns to its natural tone. Other people's opinions, which scream inside your head during the day, start to turn their volume down. And at some point, you hear something that had gone missing, yourself. But this comes with a cost. All that silence exposes things that the agitation was hiding. Old memories come back without asking permission, along with questions you'd been postponing for years and topics you swore you had already gotten over. That's why so many people can't stand being at home. It's not boredom that scares them. It's the encounter. And here, once again, Schopenhauer had a sharp reading on the subject. He pointed to boredom as one of the greatest human evils, but also as one of the greatest revealers. Whoever runs from it never finds himself, because boredom is only the antechamber of self-knowledge, and few people have the courage to walk through that door. Think about how many times you've grabbed your phone just to escape 2 minutes of emptiness. I'm not saying this to make you feel anxious, but to wake you up. Every scroll through the feed, every tab you switch, every notification you open without needing to, is a small postponement of the encounter with yourself. And those postponements pile up. Weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. And one day you wake up at 35, 40 years old, and you realize you spent your whole life next to a person you never really got to know. That person is you. Now, if every forced interaction drains you, there's a biological and psychic reason behind it. The introvert processes external stimuli in a deeper way. Every conversation demands an internal effort of decoding, of reading intentions, of managing emotions. That's not weakness. It's a different configuration of the nervous system, and ignoring that configuration is like forcing a piano to play like a drum set. Both are legitimate instruments, but each one was built to produce a specific kind of sound. When you force yourself to live like an extrovert while being an introvert, you're not evolving. You're betraying yourself. Carl Gustav Jung, decades after Schopenhauer, gave a technical name to that configuration. He described introversion as a natural orientation of the libido toward the inner world. He wasn't talking about sex, but about vital energy. While the extrovert charges his battery through contact with the world, the introvert charges his through contact with himself. One draws energy outward, the other inward. Both are complete psychic structures. Both are healthy. The pathology begins when society elects one of them as superior and forces the other to disguise itself. And this is where a Jungian concept comes in that might explain half of the silent suffering of the modern introvert: the persona, the social mask that all of us wear to move through the world. It's useful, it's necessary, but it's also exhausting. For the extrovert, putting on the persona feels lighter because the external world is his natural terrain. For the introvert, every day spent wearing the mask is like walking with heavy armor through a city full of staircases. At the end of the workday, at the end of the party, at the end of that mandatory family gathering, the body feels heavier than it should. It's not being dramatic. It's the real price of existing while performing. And when the front door of your home closes behind you, that armor falls off. That's why staying home is not laziness. It's disassembly. It's the moment when you take off the social outfit and go back to being what you were before you learned how to please. Few people notice the sacred value of that instant. It seems ordinary. You come in, you take off your shoes, you sit on the couch, you breathe. But in that small domestic ritual, something is happening that Jung would call a reunion with the self. And that reunion is the foundation of the process of individuation, which is the journey of becoming what you really are, and not the copy of what people expected you to be. Before we go on, keep this question in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to it later. If staying home is so restorative, why does the world insist so much that you have to go out? Hold on to that. The answer changes the game. In the meantime, consider your home from a different angle. You probably see it as a utilitarian space, a place to sleep and take care of obligations. But historically, the home was something else. It was a temple of thought. Immanuel Kant built one of the most influential philosophical systems in history without ever leaving Königsberg, practically without leaving his own domestic routine. Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 2,000 poems in silent bedrooms. Marcel Proust wrote thousands of pages of a monumental work inside a room lined with cork. The pattern repeats itself. A great portion of what humanity has produced of most depth was born within four walls, at the pace of inner life, far from the noise of the public square. That's not a coincidence. There's a kind of depth that only emerges in a controlled, predictable, silent environment. The brain needs low stimulation in order to generate complex associations. Deep creativity asks for boredom. It asks for repetition. It asks for that long, aimless stare out the window. When you stay home and allow yourself to do nothing for extended periods of time, you are creating the laboratory conditions for thoughts that would never arise in a shopping mall. That's why so many important ideas come to you in the shower, in bed, in the kitchen while doing the dishes. It's domestic idleness working as an incubator. The world out there gives you information. The home gives you knowledge. They are different things. Information is what enters your head without passing through your filter. Knowledge is what you have digested, crossed with your experience, transformed into an internal tool. The internet gives you an obscene amount of the first and almost none of the second. And the only way to turn information into knowledge is to have silent time to process it. That kind of time, today, has become a rarity. And the introvert who stays home is, without even knowing it, protecting the most valuable raw material of modern life, which is unfragmented attention. But there is a trap on this path, and it's important to be honest about it, because no serious script can pretend that silence is always medicine. Not every act of staying home is healthy. There's the retreat that builds you up, and there's the isolation that sickens you. From the outside, the two look alike. Both involve a person inside their own environment, far from the world. But on the inside, they are opposite movements. Wise retreat comes from love for oneself. You stay because being there is good. Because being there you produce, you think, you rest, you restore. Sick isolation comes from fear of the world. You stay because it hurts out there. Because every time you go out it becomes a traumatic event. Because human contact has turned into a threat, not a choice. It's completely valid to feel that at certain moments. I know this may hurt, but that difference has to be said out loud, because a lot of people confuse the two paths for years. Everyone, at certain phases of life, slips into defensive isolation, after a disappointment, after a loss, after a very intense period. But if that phase stretches on for months, if it starts taking things from you instead of giving to you, if it turns into a prison instead of a refuge, then it's time to recognize the pattern. The healthy introvert doesn't run from the world. He simply returns to himself when he needs to. The suffering introvert no longer knows how to cross the doorway going out. That difference, though subtle, defines completely distinct paths. And it stung, didn't it? So how do you know which side you're on? There's a simple test, and it comes down to what you do with your time at home. The retreat that builds you up is active, even when it looks passive. You read with attention. You write by hand every now and then. You gaze out of windows. You study things nobody is demanding of you. You take care of plants with patience. You cook slowly, and you listen to music with presence. The domestic environment becomes a space for going deeper. The isolation that sickens you, on the other hand, is anesthetic. You go into autopilot. You scroll for hours. You consume content without absorbing it. You sleep to escape. You eat without hunger. You avoid mirrors. There's a different quality in the air. One of them gives you back to life. The other one sucks you out of it. If you've identified that you lean more toward wise retreat, there are silent routines that amplify that benefit. They are not magic formulas. They are simple gestures that a lot of people underestimate. Deep reading, for example. The kind where you stop on the same page for 10 minutes because one sentence knocked you down, is one of the most powerful exercises of mental reorganization that exists. Writing by hand, even without any goal, is another practice Jung recommended. He kept voluminous diaries where he recorded dreams, images, reflections. Not because he wanted to publish them, but because writing brings order. It puts on paper what was spinning loose inside your head. Solitary walking, though it happens outdoors, is an extension of domestic life. Going out to walk without headphones, without a goal, without a clear destination, looking at the trees, paying attention to your own steps, is one of the oldest forms of meditation. The Greek peripatetic philosophers philosophized while walking. Nietzsche wrote much of his own work while walking through the Swiss mountains. There's a connection between the slow movement of the body and the fluidity of thought that science is just beginning to map, but that philosophy has intuited for thousands of years. You don't need to run a marathon. You just need to walk without rushing. Contemplation also deserves a place of honor. And I'm not talking about anything esoteric here. I'm talking about the simple act of sitting still and looking at something. A cup of coffee giving off steam, the afternoon light coming through the window, the branch of a tree swaying. 5 minutes like that, without a phone, without music, without thinking about tasks, produces a measurable reduction of cortisol in the brain. It is the radical opposite of the infinite scroll. It is landing the mind. And the landed mind, contrary to what many people think, does not become empty. It becomes clear. And clarity is the soil where truly original ideas sprout. Now, I promised I'd come back to that question left hanging. Why does the world insist so much that you have to go out? The answer is uncomfortable, but necessary. Because a person who is enough for themselves is a person who is hard to fit into the machinery. The dynamic of the modern market depends on dissatisfied people. Dissatisfaction sells. The well-adjusted introvert, who has learned to extract deep pleasure from his own bedroom, escapes that structural logic. He doesn't need a new outfit in order to feel like somebody. He doesn't need an end-of-the-year trip in order to justify his own year having existed. He is already whole at home. That doesn't mean he never buys clothes, never eats out, or never travels. It just means those choices come from a different place. They come from authentic desire, not from an emotional need to fill a hole. And that distinction changes the whole economy of a life. Whoever consumes out of real pleasure spends less and lives more. Whoever consumes out of existential emptiness spends more and lives less. The silence of your living room, therefore, isn't just comfort. It is a form of economic and psychological emancipation that few discourses will ever sell you, because nobody profits from teaching you that. If you're enjoying this content, check the first comment for our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. Moving on. There's a beautiful paradox at the end of this journey. Whoever learns to stay home in a state of fullness, when they decide to go out, goes out differently. The quality of human contact changes. You no longer go places out of fear of being alone. You don't accept invitations out of obligation. You don't stay in conversations just to avoid looking rude. You start to choose. And choosing, in the human context, is one of the rarest and most dignified gestures there is. The well-adjusted introvert doesn't run from people. He just starts filtering which of them deserve his rare presence. And rare presence is worth more. It's simple emotional arithmetic. When you distribute your attention to everyone, it's worth little to each one. When you reserve it for a few, it weighs a great deal to those few. Your friendships become deeper. Your conversations become denser. Your romantic relationships take on another quality, because the person by your side feels they were chosen, and not just included in some generic social circuit. The social life of the well-adjusted introvert is not poor. It is edited. And editing is what separates a good story from a pile of loose pages. There is something very rare about a friendship that has survived the filter of silence. It carries a truth that hurried friendships will never have. But none of this comes for free. Staying home in a state of fullness requires training. It requires learning to endure your own silence in the first days, when it still feels uncomfortable. It requires walking through that initial sensation that you ought to be doing something else. It requires switching off the inherited guilt of a culture that has confused productivity with worth. In the first few weeks, your brain is going to try to push you back toward the noise. It will invent fake tasks. It will manufacture urgencies. That's the natural resistance of a mind accustomed to anesthesia. Persist. On the other side of that discomfort, there is a peace that no nightclub, no trip, no crowd can offer. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you already knew this. And this peace is not the peace of giving up. It is not the famous giving up on the world that some people mistake for wisdom. It is an active peace, full of internal projects, full of silent discoveries, full of a discreet joy that doesn't need applause in order to exist. It is the peace of someone who has stopped begging for external validation. It is the peace of someone who has understood that life doesn't happen in the places where everyone is running, but inside the quality of attention you dedicate to the present moment, whether it be at a party or in an empty chair in front of the window. Staying home, in the end, is not about the home. It is about where you are living on the inside. There are people who spend their entire lives at parties and never arrive at themselves. There are people who spend their entire lives at home and live inside their own thoughts as if they lived in a mansion. The external address matters little. The internal address is everything, and the silence of your living room, if you know how to inhabit it, is one of the fastest doorways to arriving at that address. You are not missing out on life. You are finally finding it where nobody had thought to look. While everyone else runs outward, desperately trying to fill their own emptiness with stimuli that evaporate by the next day, you walk inward. And it is there, in that territory almost nobody visits, that the answers are. The ones the entire world spends its life looking for, on the streets, in the bars, on the screens, on the trips, in the hurried relationships. The answers were never on the outside. They were always waiting for you to come home, sit down in your favorite corner, take a deep breath, and finally realize that the most important place in the universe fits inside a silent living room at 9 o'clock at night on an ordinary Wednesday. If this video touched something important in you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next reflections, and consider joining our members club, where we go deeper into these themes in exclusive content made for those who really want to transform their own way of existing. Your presence here makes a difference, and every comment of yours helps more silent people find this corner of YouTube, which was made, deep down, for them.